welcome back. It's Christine again with the Artist Pod, and today we'll be talking about how to draw a flapjack octopus. As always, I'm using a Wacom Intuos Pro tablet, and I'm drawing straight into Photoshop. So, let's get arting. Alright, so here's the octopus. The same octopus I believe that was in Finding Nemo. But they're the cute little guys that have, they have like a skirt around their bodies where their tentacles are under. I wanted to do something a little different where I have two of his little tentacles sort of popping up. But yeah, so we're just going to get started. Have a couple different colors. They have some blue around their eyes. I think they can be a variety of colors. We're actually going to, because of all the wrinkles in them, we're going to go long ways as we draw it. Still the same though, one stroke in between the others, right? A stroke, one in between. We're just going a different direction. Behind this little flap, we're going to have some of this color that's visible, but not much. So it's like it's partially obscured. And then, whoops, that was a little off. And then, other direction as well. And same thing with the little flap thing. We'll make sure that some of it kind of barely shows up. Done that before. But for now, in this step, I'm going to focus first on getting, the rest of him in. And then we can figure out the ear, or I don't know what it is. An ear? A head flap? I don't really know. I don't know what it's meant to be for an octopus. Right down the sides. Gonna re-angle that actually. Oops, I'll come back. Gonna angle you out. So we're just gonna angle out now that we're over here. Instead of undoing what I just did. Right, and just build this down. The reason this is important to angle this back out instead of having it come down is if I have it come straight down, there'll come a point at which I'm going to have to deal with some line conflicts in the middle. So what I need to have happen are the lines actually going off the edge. So sort of anticipating that, realized my mistake and readjusted. So, line conflicts on the highlighted side might not be as obvious, but you can sometimes see them when you make a mistake on the shadowed side. Right, and just sort of pull them off. It's fine. You can angle it just a little bit, right? Like you can have it angling down just that little bit as it comes to the edge, make it a little easier. And this is kind of running into a little bit of a hump. Admittedly, I was a little overzealous with my hump on that side. And I don't know what I'm doing on this side. Let's try that again. And see, this will avoid line conflicts. Doesn't matter how long the lines are. There's no fur. There's also some white, so that'll be popping up as well. This is just running into it. Certainly need to indicate I don't know what I was going to say, so I'm not going to. Down here, I'm going to change the direction of the line just a little bit because there's some scrunching up that's happening because of his, the way his tentacles are going and how they're all kind of folded under each other. So some of this will have to be sorted with highlights and shadows. Because they're kind of all jumbled up. And then there's some white that we'll have on here as well. Right, and you have this kind of tentacle popping out on both sides. You have kind of a tentacle popping out just a bit. sure that the lines meet back in a way that makes sense. Same thing over here. A little bit more angled down. They're wrinkled up a little bit more because they're all kind of scrunched together. Because this is going to change color, this line section ends, so down in here you don't have to worry about line conflicts. Like I don't have to remerge this back. Or down here. But here I do. Right, if we loop and follow, what I'm doing is then looping it back. Okay. And then under here as well. Skin is a little bit more stretched down here because he's stretching his little skirt up. And then determining exactly where the color change is happening, because there's a white strip where the tentacles are. I think it pushes in a bit more than what this is showing. So pushing this in order to readjust for that. So we'll have this coming in just a bit. Doesn't have to be like a perfect line here because it's just a color change. Not really changing much else. I'm going to push that in. Okay. Now for the white. There's a little bit of a white ridge up in here. And that follows. So it's kind of on the edges. And then there's a little bit of a white ridge down here. And here. And here. Some of this won't have a whole lot of highlighting. And this is the bottom of some tentacles, right? So making them bulky to indicate that they're tentacles are just on an angle that we can't see very well. We take that layer off, that's what we have so far. Same thing, a little bit of white, and then tentacles coming down. Before it kind of goes a little bit smoother. To these white sections that are tucking under, right? So this is kind of a fold over. So they really, for the most part, these white sections would be in shadow. Okay, and then we have white. They actually have these guys have like a little hole in the middle, so I'm doing kind of this quick loop and leaving a hole. It's actually a really easy way to do it. We'll see if it looks okay. I'm gonna have to make some adjustments later. Certainly gonna have to probably fill more in. Does it change angles? Still leaving that gap. And then there's also some white following the edges of them around. so in between all of these guys, some white coming down. All right, so if I take off the sketch, it's kind of what we get. This is probably just a smidge too extreme. Just gonna readjust that. We'll see. We had shadows and highlights. I hope that'll fix it a bit. All right, same thing here, right? We have that strip. Kind of coming up and over. And down. And then we're going to have the suckers, or the whatchamacallits. Right, so quick circle. It's going to be some detail to add. Probably a little time consuming. Take that off. So we got so far. All right, and then we're going to add a little bit of blue around the eyes, and some brown as well. Right, so same direction, same idea, just a different color. And a little jagged potentially. Same thing on this side. They have some blue sort of mixed in too, but we'll probably do more of that once. Once we get into the shadows and highlights. All right, I'm going to go back to the original layer here, because right around the eyes is actually this tan still. Being careful in the eyes, because, well, like all animals, right? The first thing we look at are eyes, and it doesn't matter what the animal is. If we find something identifiable as an eye, that's where we're going to look first. And this is, it's almost like he's got a little eyelid. Again, just being careful. I just messed up there. Till then, you know, being careful. Well, I just did it on the wrong layer, but I guess that's fine. I'm going to do a new layer to add this in very lightly. And it'll be covered by some blue. So if I pop that off, that's what we have. All right. All right, so now for to add the highlights and shadows, I'm going to have the light source coming from above and to the right. As always, that means it's above and in front of, not behind or next to. Often for sea creatures, I'll have it coming from straight above, but it's not necessarily something I like to do, so I'm not going to. So, before I get started, sometimes what I'll do is I'll try to sort out where the shadows will be. So with the light source coming from above and to the right, his face is looping over this way, so there'd be shadows on this side, and I'm going to go ahead and pop that off. I might need it back, but I'm going to need to get its edge done, right? So here's its little flappy flap. So this is light pin pressure, just more lines on the side that's shadowed. Now I have to be careful, because the more lines you add, the brighter it becomes, right? So you can still highlight with more lines without adding more pin pressure, but as long as we're mindful of that, I'm having trouble aiming for the right spot. Right, so as long as we're mindful of that, we can make sure we don't accidentally highlight it, and then just kind of see I'm angling it down a little as I come over. It's just going to be that little bit easier. Now all sides will be in shadow, but obviously the side on the opposite side of the light source will be and a bigger shadow than the side on the light source. Yeah, I'd say the light source is probably coming up. The shadow is probably coming all the way up. I'm going to give myself a runway. There would be some transition over to highlight here, but the bigger the runway, the easier it is to transition from highlight into shadow. Give myself a nice long runway. And be consistent over what's happening and where it's happening as far as where the shadow is, right? And as I come up, I'm going to need it to be in the same spot all the way. So just light pin pressure as we fill this in. Now he's a bit wrinkly, so we have some opportunity to add some wrinkles if we want to. We don't have to. Just something to kind of consider. Might be interesting, might not be. Might be a lot of work for very little gain, so still debating on that. Might experiment a little bit. Right, so we need this to follow this up. Probably end right around in here. Again, I'm giving myself a runway, so this would be in shadow. I'm going to go ahead and bridge the gap with its little flappy section. It's okay to have some overlap with different colors. And I'm just going to check. Yeah, okay. Down here, this is going to be more solid as it goes up into its little flap. And probably some wrinkles and stuff, so I am going to go ahead and change some direction there. We'll bridge this gap here and then do a sort of a light area of wrinkles around, and then add some wrinkles down in here, and then we'll get to the highlight. So all right, we still have the side of the face, right? We're doing it over here because his whole head it's like a giant, I don't know, he's kind of like a giant misshapen ball. And so in that regard, it's going to be relatively easy to sort out his highlights and shadows because there's not a whole lot happening in the upper part of him that would change what we're doing necessarily, although I don't know that I'm bringing this out far enough. So I had it out to here and then I tucked back in. So let's bring this out. That's why I actually came up here and I did that, because I knew my inclination was going to be to start pulling in, and you kind of see I did it naturally. It does happen, so being mindful when you're shadowing, right, especially if you have a long expanse where you're coming up, the shadow really needs to make sense with what you're doing, so either keeping it consistent, or if it's peeling back, it would make more sense that this is where it would be receding than down here. So kind of keeping that in mind. And you know, your natural tendency is probably to do it without realizing it, which is why I just pushed it out. I know mine is, so I need to make sure that I keep myself from doing that accidentally and changing exactly where that shadow would be and not realizing it until later. Right, okay. Again, some of this is just a runway, so the longer the shadow, the longer the runway you're going to have. Now down in here, right, you have this backside coming down. And you have all these guys. Some of this is going to be highlight, right? You're going to have some of this guy specifically picking up highlight. Light source coming from above and to the right. He's going to be turned in just the right way. Back here, though, this is shadow. It's distinctly right on that back side, and because of how their bodies are, it's kind of tucking in and under this flap here, just like this flap's tucking under this one. So No doubt about that, they will be absolutely in shadow. And, you know, you're looking just like we're on that back side, right, with the body. We're on the back side with his little flappy tentacles. Same thing under here. This is blocked by the other tentacle. Are they called tentacles? Arms? Maybe it's arms. Octopus arms? Oh, I don't know. I draw stuff. Not always the sharpest individual. Okay. Bringing that down. Might have a little bit. Well, I'll see. Once I start, it really depends on what angle that light source is coming in, as to how much of this will be catching highlight. I'll have a better idea when I pull back exactly how much I'm thinking about, right? Light source coming from above and to the right. This is obviously curved in, but this is a bulge. There might be a little bit of light coming and pushing into here, right through this section, but not here or here, and down here it's definitely too twisted. There would be some highlighting in here though. Right, so I'm still adding a bit of shadow. And certainly, yeah, okay. You have this side of his tentacle in shadow. This would be turned away, right? Because it's a little tentacle guy. And this is distinctly turned away from light source. So this has some substance to it. Likewise, you know, it's over this section, so this would also be in shadow because it's tucked behind the tentacle. And then you have kind of this section underneath that'll be kicking in. Right. So all I'm really doing is making sure the two edges don't connect, and that should create kind of a line, and you can kind of see it. So as we add highlights here, that should make this pop out a little bit better as it's coming down. Okay, so all of this side is curved away from us, so this would be shadow. Because his tentacle pops forward. And because it pops forward, this is in a recess behind it, like a valley. Right, so we're just going to bring that down to a nice shadow down here as well. Kind of surrounding it with this shadow. It'll look really good when we add the highlight onto this tentacle down here. Right, all the way underneath this whole side, maybe a little bit. It's such a big expanse. I don't think so though. The tentacle itself is going to have some highlighting, but this back side, maybe not as much. Okay, so you're going to have some shadow underneath. Let's go ahead and make sure that's in. Shadowing underneath with all of this, right? Bottom is, in fact, turning away from light source, so there's no doubt about that. Make sure that line makes sense. Okay. There's going to be some shadowing right here, because you have the hump of this tentacle now that's coming down, so that would create a little bit of a shadow. Not much of one, but it would still be there as it sort of angles in, so we're going to give itself a little bit of extra breathing room here. And it likely would be at least all the way around, but I'm going to give a little extra breathing room. It'll let me add highlight a little freer, just as I mentioned on the other side, right? You have a little bit more room to create a runway to add highlight in. Just connecting all of that in. A little bit of shadowing over here where it's connecting in, and then you have where it would create a shadow from above. I might just do what I did on the other and just fill this whole thing in, and then I can add highlight a little freer. And then again, shadowing underneath. I'm not going to fill that whole thing in. And some of that wouldn't be, right? Depending on your light source angle would change what's happening here. And then under this little flap, I'm going to add a little bit of shadowing. And of course over here. So all of these little digits, right, would create a shadow against here too. Be some shadowing as the tentacle kind of comes down. And then this would be blocking the light from above. All right. Making some progress. Okay. This is probably pushing out a bit, but this down here is underneath, so this would be in shadow. And you have tentacle here blocking. Okay, now, side of the light source, but this is over, so there's definitely some shadow coming this way, and it's looping kind of away, so we're going to have some shadowing over here. Some of this will be highlight though. Same over here. Again, some of this will be highlight. And then where it's kind of tucking away, some of this in highlight, and we'll do some of this in shadow. Some of the white will be taking some of the shadow, so that's why it's not fully filling in as much as I typically would, because it's going to be, some of that's going to be in another color. Alright, so I'm going to surround the rest of them with like a light line of shadow. I think that's the last place it'll need it, and I will be right back. Rest of this should be highlight. Have to watch out for the ear over here. I really don't know what this is. It might be an ear. Maybe it's fins. I keep thinking of it as an ear. I don't know if it's actually an ear. So, then this will be full pin pressure. You can see what a difference full pin pressure makes. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in his entire face right down in here, and I'll be back before I get to the tentacles and down in here. So I will be right back. All right, there's more highlighting to go, but it's a little bit more complicated as to how it sort of fits in, so I figure we could talk about this. Obviously here, you know, everything's so harsh. This is what I mean about giving yourself like a nice long runway, right? You don't want this, where it's such this harsh line all the way around. So now what I'm going to do is right along the edge of it all, where all of these connections are happening, I'm not going to add more pin pressure. I'm going to add more lines and slowly brighten it up to create kind of a you know, gentle transition from highlight into shadow, right? So we're just going to start adding more lines in, really brighten it up by the highlight, and then tapering it off, blending it in. When it's done right, you shouldn't be able to tell where that original transition point happened. It should just kind of fade into shadow. Right, see, this is still too drawing right through here, so. But this is what I mean by nice long runway. You can see how far out I'm having to pull it. And you can change that how extreme you want the shadow to kick in. But with a long runway, you can make it nice and long and subtle. And you can already see the difference, right? From the top here where it's still not connected to down here where it's starting to look more and more blended. Not as much as I would like yet, but it's getting there. And again, just adding more lines will do this because it's already shadowed, which means it'll be a lot quicker to brighten up. We're going to have a lot less space to work with on the right side and the top. So it'll be a truncated transition. Right, and this is still a little too drawing right through here. You can see where transitions are happening, so it's just a matter of brightening up just a little bit where one is and fading it. And then we can see about maybe adding some wrinkles too. And just making sure that it makes sense all the way up, right? If anything, the highlight would be pushing over more on the forehead than below, so having it kind of angle out this way. Let me start getting into the head. And doing the same thing. Potentially pulling it all the way to the edge, but still leaving it more in shadow than it would have been. It's a little easier on this line because of how it's drawn than pulling up right to an edge. Right, see how easy that sort of transitions. It's already looking a lot better. It doesn't have that harsh line over here. I'm skipping right behind the oops, wrong thing. The, I don't know, flappy thing for right now. You can see I might be pulling this all the way to the edge, but that's okay because I'm still backing off my pin pressure as we come over. So even though this is pushing to the edge, it's it shouldn't brighten it up as much as the highlight is, but it might brighten it up more than I originally had it, and that's fine. To allow the transition to happen. I backed off my pin pressure just a little bit on this edge, on the highlights on this edge, to make it a little easier to transition it. It has all of these guys. It has, you know, this would be highlight through here. You have kind of the edge, I was going to say the mouth, that's not the mouth. You have the edge of this guy that would be in highlight. And I was leaving it in shadow when we started, but now it's time to get this going. Right, you have this coming down. Full pin pressure, this is full highlight. Kind of runs into each other. It's just sort of a, you know, it's bulging differently. Still want this to bridge though. Gonna make a little bit of a shadow just to indicate there's a bulge happening here. But it's not gonna be a big one, right? So if you pull back, there's a little indication something's happening, but shouldn't be anything big. This pulls all the way down maybe some shadowing under where it's kind of connecting here. You have, you know, kind of an edge. It's not going to be a major one though, because it's not a big divot. It's just kind of a gap where they're folding onto each other. Don't know if that's even the right thing to call it. Right, so full pin pressure, full pin pressure. The white will be the edge here, right? So it's okay to not have full pin pressure down here because we have kind of this white that would be underneath. Having said that, you still have kind of this guy who's tucking under this one. So we're going to pull a little bit of highlighting in, but then inevitably, right, it's tucking into the mouth of this one. Get this a little edge like we did with the other one. And then pull that down. It's with the shadows and highlights that the magic of the composition happens, right? That's where you're really going to get a sense for what's what and how it's working. Yeah, you can really kind of see how this is bulging out with just that little bit of shadow we did. And do the same thing kind of down here. It's kind of running into a thing, and then, you know, free and clear from the top, we'll have the edge of that tentacle. White's kicking in. The white will be in shadow here as it turns, but not this part. Well, I mean part of this part. And this, of course, you have the tentacle kind of bending up. Tip going into shadow, I'm sure it's ramming just a little bit into his body there. Allowing this to blur or, you know, transition. Right, so there's one side of his cute little octopus self. All right. All right, now we have the flap here. So instead of having it fold in, I'm having it fold out, which means this will be in highlight. Gonna have a little bit of shadowing just on the edge to indicate this is something different. There's also a rim of white here that may do that for me. Keep forgetting it's there. Go all the way up to the edge of, you know, its little sucker things. So with this folded out, all of this would be in highlight. Till we get, some of this will, I already tried to do the shadows, so this folded out, yeah, this should also be highlight. Bringing that down right to the edge of the other tentacle. And then we're going to ram that in, backing off my pin pressure so it can fade in nicely to this section down here. But here ramping that back up because I no longer need to fade it. Alright, all of that highlight. Pull back and yeah, you can see it. And then I'm gonna fix this down here so it's a smoother transition. Shouldn't be any jagged edges, it's just kind of one big bubble. Okay. Will be some shadowing here, right? It's angling in, up and in. But there will also still be some highlight, depending on how flat it is. Let's do a little bit of highlighting. Just trying to think how that would go. This is coming in, light source roughly here. I feel like it would be. Yeah, we'll continue. I feel like that might still be catching. And there would be some shadowing underneath. And obviously, you know, a good amount of shadowing here as it first starts tapering. Probably do. I'm just going to put this in shadow real fast, although. That fully makes sense with what I've done for that to be shadow. Stretched out across it. That's what I'm debating on. Could probably fade it as it comes down. As it comes here where it hits a tipping point and fades into shadow. Because it wouldn't make sense for it not to be in some amount of highlight. Okay, and then highlight on this side, right? This is now coming back up, so of course this would have a highlight. Being careful around the edges of the tentacle now. You know, light source coming from above and to the right, shadow would kick in, but not immediately. And certainly on a tighter angle than what I've done. Depends though, how far out it is from the subject, right? If it's really close, in this case they're right against it, shadow would be right against them. Same is actually true up here. Shadow would be right against, not right against, but a little different on this side because you have that angle coming in. And of course you have the tentacle. So I'm going to fill in the rest of this section in highlight and then the tentacle here, and I will be right back. Right, okay, I'm just worried this might not translate very well, so we're going to temper this out significantly. Not 100%, but significantly. Okay. And then we're going to fade this in, right, just like we did before, where we need to sort of build in that highlight, especially against that side of the tentacle. We're going to have some highlighting in here. Again, pretty close because of the nature of it, and it would actually push all the way over, but it wouldn't go all the way down because this tentacle's kind of angling just a bit. Otherwise it would. It certainly won't go all the way up or on the outside. Make sure that that is nice and close. What's happening here? And then we need to temper out under here, right? So that's a nice fade. Now this, like the other one was folding the opposite way, right? This one's folding out. But this guy would still very potentially be picking up some light because of how it's angled. Right, when you pull back and kind of look at it. It's coming forward just that bit, so that light is probably hitting it. I'm thinking it would be hitting into here too. Potentially tapering off. I'm going to have this going back just a bit. Have that fade as it comes down. And then you have, of course, the white, which we haven't gotten to just yet. So we'll have that shadow come all the way over, even though I kind of did that. That's fun. And then bring this all the way around. Fading it in. Right, fading it in. And then we can look for some other spots to add like smaller bits of highlight down in here on these guys just a little bit. Help differentiate some of the coloring. You don't have to do much for those. Not looking to make like a big differentiation, but sometimes a little bit, adding just a few extra lines to create just a subtle change of elevation can help. Make sure this is nice and faded. Right. So I'm going to add just a little bit over here. So you have kind of that burst coming off that side. And then maybe some coming down. While it's under, it's potentially turning a bit towards the light source, so giving it just a little bit might not be a bad thing. I'm going to do a little bit to that back side too, but not a whole lot. That gives it, see, just that little bit gives it a little bit of extra dimension. Yeah, okay. Just going to brighten up some of this. Just across his nose. Now if we wanted to add wrinkles, right, it'd be a matter of like really just kind of highlighting certain sections. Should probably do it on another layer. Well, before we do that, let me get right around his eyes, because his eyes have, it's almost like they're jutting out, almost like, you know, eyelids, right? So we have his eyes here. Being careful around eyes, as I've mentioned before, they're important. We recognize eyes. Right, so I'm going to do them both in shadow, and I'll be right back. This shouldn't take long. So light source coming from above into the right, so you're going to have a little bit of highlighting right through here. That light source hitting that edge. And subsequently sort of feathering that out. Some highlighting on this sort of back side, not against that edge. And then fading this off because it's kind of dipping down onto the sides of his face. Right into a recess here. Bring that all the way over the top. And then, you know, it connects in, having that fade down too. Okay. This one is turned to the shadowed side. Still going to do a little bit of brighter, but not full pin pressure like I did over there. A little bit of brighter up at the top, indicating it's going down into like a ridge. Doesn't take much. Bring that all the way over. Or all the way up, I should say. Connect it into that side. Yeah. Okay. Now, if we're going to do wrinkling, just a matter of putting like extra pin pressure in places and then allowing the wrinkle to wrinkle a little deeper into a shadow than you know, something else would. Even just doing that, you get the sensation that, right, it's got some wrinkles happening. On this side, it's basically the same thing. If I put more pressure, I'm going to be able to see more than you would have been able to otherwise. You get the same kind of illusion. Because of how, you know, the drawing style here is, you don't fully, you know, erase that out, and then there'd be wrinkles all over, right? So we've got wrinkling as it pulls across kind of the middle. Right, you can see all those little wrinkles, what they're doing. Add a nice effect. Subtle though. We pre-plan them out if we wanted to be a little bit more obvious. And then I'm going to pop you back on. I have some wrinkling right against his head here and here. And I'd be pushing up a bit into this flappy thing before it kind of goes clear where the back picks up. So that means I need to do the same over here. Pushing up just a little bit before it goes to shadow. Yeah. And then here the wrinkles are kind of up and down because he's stretching, you know, a different way. So could try to do wrinkles here, but maybe not as obvious because of how it's being pulled and stretched. Same here. You have these long wrinkles. Can do it a little bit more on this section. Let me get some of that sensation. Area around this to be a little brighter. So this is a little bit more faded, but I still need to connect in. I need the edges to make sense. So I don't want the edges to necessarily look clear. Well, I do kind of, but same thing over here, so I'm brightening up just a little bit, right up to the edge, making this nice and clean. Around the thing. All right. But not so much that there's a big gap. Now for the white, not a lot of white, it's just kind of on the tentacles and this lip up here, right? So we have this little lip where it's kind of catching against the tentacles. And then it's pulled down. It's catching over here too. It's pulled down. And then we have all of these guys, which will somewhat be in shadow, right? Because they're on the edge. So it's going underneath, which means at this point it's in shadow. But right on the edge, maybe a little bit of streaks of some highlight as it's coming down, right before it gets to that edge. And then this is kind of tucking away into a recess, so being careful here. But then once again we're underneath, so maybe a little bit of highlighting right against that edge. Now up here, changing a little bit of how I'm drawing, I'm just making these quick semicircles to indicate it's the bottom of that tentacle. Man, my words are struggling today. Right, we have that edge over here already in shadow, which means this would be in shadow already as well. It's kind of turned away. Whereas on this side, it would be in highlight, except the very edge. So same thing, I'm going to do little swoops. I'm going to do a quick shadow with these little swoops, and then we'll do it in highlight. Of course, before it runs into that, you have all of this, which would be in shadow, definitively tucked behind. All right, and then we have that in some highlight here. And then fading this out. And making sure these edges are also kind of faded out. Okay. Yeah, you get kind of that sensation, right? When you pull back, you can kind of see those ridges like you'd see on tentacles. And then these would be shadow. That's before we get to the others with the suckers on them. The other two. Tucks behind. Have that nice shadow going, and this is obviously on that back side. So solidly shadow. And I have some shadowing on the white here, right on this inside, because it's going down that hoop. Gotta figure out exactly where that twist happens. And then of course underneath, which is kind of what this is, you'd have shadow. Because it's turned down, right? It's turned away from the light source. So all of that, just like we did for the other. Still have shadow here. It started turning downward. So we're going to follow that shadow to the same height as the other one. And then some point through here you would have a light versus shadow kicking in. You'd have a highlight coming up and around going to give a little bit more shadow than I need to. Right, this is facing down, so this would be in shadow. Now that tip go in the opposite direction. And this is tucked in on the opposite side. Some highlighting, but it'd be easier to do. Mostly shadow. Okay, on this side, right, you have this whole back side shadow. And then of course it rounds down and underneath. So all of this would be in shadow. Same on this side. Right, it's tucking under, so some of this may be highlight, but doing it in shadow just to be safe. Underneath here would be in shadow. It's turning away from that light source. And then on this inside would be in shadow. Same reason. It's turned away from the light source. All the way up before it starts kicking in. Okay, now the suckers. Let's do the highlights on the tentacle itself. So, alright, so then we have the highlight here. So it fades down. Some shadowing underneath the suckers, but not above. And then fading over. As it twists, so too with that angle of that light source coming in, right? So. And then you would still have some light coming down here. This would still be getting some as well on that little strip. Not much room. Just backing out to see if I'm doing the right thing. I feel like this would have, oh, maybe not there. A little bit more light coming over as the tentacle itself shifts, which means that, you know, you would cut it in a different spot as to where highlight and shadow end or begin. Now, for the tentacles, just gonna come around in a circle and brighten them up some. And I already kind of have that center point, so just kind of circling along that center point and then brightening up. It's flat, so be potentially catching the light until you get down. And even then, I don't know exactly how their little suckers look. So down in here, we would start getting into shadow. Fill it all the way in, but you would have some shadowing. Or it's catching on just one side. And then here we change the angle of them, because now it's starting to turn as the tentacle turns. And then getting ever smaller. I'm gonna make this one a little bigger. Oh, but not that big. And just the right side really on that part as it turns away. Yeah, see, by adding a little bit of shadow underneath, you give the sense that they're actual and against his little tentacle. And then we have the other one. Do it the same way where we started with the tentacle, right? So this is highlight. But down in here is shadow. And then there's shadow against the bottoms of these guys, but have some highlighting up top. And pull down the highlighting along with where this one cuts. Same thing here. I have some shadowing, some shadowing, some shadowing. Not nearly as deep as I'm making it, but they're all the same. Shadowing. and keeping in mind what direction we're going here. Alright, so highlight. All the way to the top of the sucker. And then cutting off, it looks like over here. It's kind of doing the same thing. This whole side. Nice highlight. And then shadowing. They're so close together. Highlight and shadowing. And this is starting to twist under, which means this angle of where my highlight is going to shift as well. And I can't have it all the way under. Making sure it stays close though, so I don't want to get overzealous. Zipping back under. So now being mindful of how I'm getting the last little highlights in on the sucker, on the, well, whatever it is, on the tentacle. There we go. I would have highlight on the edge, highlight on the edge, highlight on the edge. Nice good highlight there. Now as I'm doing these, right, I need to be mindful of their placement on the tentacle. So if it starts twisting or turning, I need to back off my highlight in certain spots. As the tentacle comes sort of around and or turns away, or whatever it is. We're starting to get into some shadows over here. Still have some highlight on that tentacle though. But maybe not on that back side. And down in here, back off a lot. Still have a little bit catching the light maybe. And then we have this guy where we've changed his angle as we've started to turn away from the light source. Same is true with him. All right. So now that we have the white, great, he looks cute. Let's do the blue and then go back and fill in his little flap things. Whatever they are. Okay. Should be relatively straightforward. Gonna have a little bit of an edge where that eye was going into like a shadow. Going into a recess around the blue. So I'm going to go ahead and just put a little bit of a shadow there, trying to indicate there's a gap. But then the rest of this on this side is going to be in highlight. On the other side, the whole thing will really be in shadow. Now at full pin pressure, as we are out and to the races. So relatively easy, right? This part. Just following the lines, already did the shadow, so I'm going to fill this in on both sides. On the other side it's just going to be shadow, and I will be right back. Give it a little bit of a brightening on this side where some of this was running into it, right where you had some of that brightening on that one side running into it. A little swoop underneath the eye just for some extra highlighting. Alright. Now I am going to put a little bit of blue. I'm going to start a new layer to do this. I'm going to do some lines and things because they have some blue that kind of comes off and you can almost see it in places. I'm going to do some dots. Being mindful of how much pin pressure I'm putting depending on where I'm putting the dots, right? Nothing too heavy in areas where there would be shadow, but heavier in spots where there'd be highlight. Okay. Yeah, alrighty. Now all we have is the little ear flaps. Okay, so I did start a new layer, right? Always check. Gonna have this looping off to the side one way, coming straight down the middle here, and then looping to either side off that. I'll often do that. It helps avoid line conflicts, especially on something like this. Right, we'll bring it down. I'm not putting a ton of pin pressure here because of the nature of it. I'm drawing right through that coloration as well. This will help temper what's there. And still, it'll make it look, it'll help make it look translucent, which is kind of what it is. I'm going to just set the stage for the other side, and then I'm going to take the sketch layer off because I'm going to need these edges to be nice and clean, and I can't do that with the sketch layer on. Right, so we come down in the middle, and then loop on either side. Helps keep the edges a little cleaner when you can loop it. Now, see, I need, like, I don't want a jagged edge like that, or like this coming out. Okay. So I'm just going to lightly fill in both of his little, I don't know what they are, on either side, and I'll be right back. Now, we're going to give them a little bit more of a oomph factor. They're catching some light, but still need them to appear see-through enough, which having it in front of its little, like, body here will help convey that. Alright, and fading it out on the edges. Not putting a ton of pin pressure for this. Won't take a lot because, one, it's kind of translucent, so I don't want to block that, and two, you know, I've already added some lines, so just like with the other where we don't want to add too many. Same is true in this case because it'll brighten it up, so I'm not putting a lot of pressure. I'm just adding a few more lines and putting a little bit more pressure to make it go a little quicker, but I'm not doing a ton. Get the middle in, and then we'll fade it out on the edges. About nice and faded. Make it seem a little bit more translucent, even if we brighten it up a little bit. Do the same thing on this side, because even though it's on the shadowed side, its little tip is sticking up, right? So this would be catching the light differently than the body. There's nothing to really block it. But just like the other, fade it out on the edges. I am fading it out a little bit more as it comes down as opposed to the other side. But the top should not be necessarily affected. Brighten it up like we did on the other side, and pop back and see how it looks. Yeah. All right. I am now going to give his eyes like a little bit of a, not much, just a little bit of something. Okay, something's there. And then kind of the same thing on this side, but not much because it's on the shadowed side, so not nearly as big. And I'm going to do one last thing, or see how it looks if I take the blue and just wrap some blue in its little flapper things, how that would look. Not much though. Just enough to add a little splash of color to the translucence. I'm going to do one more thing. Pulling back, I don't think this looks quite right here, so I'm going to add some white to its little tentacle. Otherwise it just seems out of place. And then maybe a little bit more on the edges where it really brightens these guys up, just that bit. Okay. Yeah, I think that looks better. Alright, so that's how you draw a Flapjack octopus. I hope that's helpful. In the floating nether next to me, I have other videos of art tutorials I have done, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.